Hello everybody, don't worry if I'm not familiar at all, despite Sasha's lovely introduction. I do get asked a lot, oh, were you at my sister's wedding? So, you know, maybe not always immediately identifiable. Thank you so much for inviting me here today. It's such a pleasure to hear all these points of view. I really enjoyed that panel, actually. There were several things that I'm probably going to pick up on, if that's okay, and try and weave into my already quite frenetic presentation. I've got a ton of slides. I will describe the ones that are important, so don't worry if you're visually impaired. I'm not going to leave you out. And some of them are just there because I like them. They're little springboards for me, so don't worry too much about them. I do want to start with a confession, actually, because I just had a look at the Smart Energy wall before, and I think I'm probably spending about £1 a day on my hair. I have very difficult hair, and I use my straighteners and my hairdryer, both of them, a lot. In fact, there's nowhere that I haven't used my hair straighteners. I was on Rainbow Warrior once, and I used my hair straighteners on Rainbow Warrior. So that's yours was Welsh cakes, mine is hair appliances. But it also kind of made me think a little bit about, there are obviously, you know, I communicate, I write about sustainability and practical sustainability, so really totally for a consumer audience. And there are things that I still do really, really badly. And it kind of makes me think a little bit, why am I so insistent on misbehaving environmentally? It's not because I'm a duplicitous person, I don't think, and I want to tell everyone else what to do and then not do it myself. It's because the barriers are there for me as well. And I find that kind of extraordinary. A lot of my friends who are journalists in different areas, so say fashion, for example, they have everything because it's all sent to them. They have the best handbag, the best shoes, you know, they have everything. It's like on trend, whatever. I don't get anything. Like, I don't have an electric car. I can't get to my meter because I live in a flat. It's encased in concrete. I don't even know how to get to it. I spend hours on the phone to my energy company. I don't have a recycling bin at the moment because Hounslow Council, and I would like to publicly shame them, have still not provided me with a recycling receptacle after 5 months of me harassing them. So, you know, the barriers are still kind of exist and are pretty medieval when I think about it in many, many circumstances. Well done to Wales, by the way, with your municipal recycling. I'm sure you don't wake up every Monday and congratulate yourself about this, but you're heading for 70% by 2025. That's way ahead of England. You know, you are actually kind of the circular economy. It might come true for you. I mean, that's exciting, that's exciting. So what I kind of want to argue for, and what I do argue for with my work, is probably some standardization in what we have access to. And behavioural change cannot really happen with all these barriers. I'm absolutely fascinated to hear Lorraine's research as well, because a lot of what I do is completely theoretical. And yours is subjected to scientific rigour. So it's always kind of really good to have these kind of meetings and actually discuss some of these ideas. So I'm going to start with the Anthropocene, why not? And what I'm really trying to do is take you on a whirlwind tour of what I do. I feel that as a writer, I need a mandate to write about sustainability. I think if you're a journalist, you should be able to prove that people need, want, or benefit from your output. You know, you shouldn't just be kind of churning stuff out. I know that doesn't apply to everybody, but if I didn't I'm essentially an agony aunt for the environment, okay? That's what I do. People send me their problems. Often it is around recycling. Often it is around energy bills. And I try and provide them with some solutions for their context. Now, one of the things that if nobody wanted it and all the problems were solved, then I legitimately wouldn't do it anymore. It's fine, you could all move on. But one of the things that I try and do is make a case for sustainable and green living. And I wanted to sort of just run through what that's looked like over the last 10 years, maybe a little bit beyond that. Don't worry, I'm going to get it all into the next 15 minutes, 10 years and 15 minutes. So the reason why I think it's important that we talk about how we live is that we have, according to many experts, entered the age of the Anthropocene. Okay, so we have the Holocene, which went on for like 10,000 years. and where we could kind of think of ourselves as existing in quite a passive way. Now, we are seen, humans are seen as the agents of change. So rather than existing in an epoch, all the choices we make, and indeed all the choices we don't make, affect the ability of planet Earth to sustain us, human life, and not just for our species, life in general. Now, I'm not sure if that helps or not to think of it in those terms. I would have said until kind of the events of late last week that it was too frightening to think of those terms, but I think, we're kind of open to anything at the moment. So it's a relatively recent addition to the lexicon of disaster. And I suppose I kind of think of it as a bit like a computer game. So you kind of work through the levels. You try and minimize your impact each time, and you're kind of working through the levels. Now, what this has given rise to is a language that's obviously extremely serious. We are in a very serious predicament, we know that. We kind of probably know all the evidence, but in 2005, the Millennium Eco Assessment concluded that human activities have resulted in a substantial and largely irreversible loss in the diversity of life on Earth. I mean, that's pretty kind of apocalyptic, isn't it? I just attended a briefing on Friday at Plymouth University where we heard from an IPCC scientist who's based there. And she was talking about predator and prey systems, plant and pollinator systems, and how they are now assessing those systems all over the world, from mountain ranges to the plains of Africa, and how they're seeing shifts, and how those things are getting out of sync because of climate change, and how sometimes species are adapting in very, very different ways. So what they are finding as a general rule is that species don't just adapt. They don't just adapt to different temperatures. Some of them can survive because they find different host plants, they find different food groups, and they're able to move actually quite long distances. Species are incredibly adaptive, which is the good news, but they don't just go, oh, you know what, we can live with this. So there is inevitably a shift. Now, that's led us, and I want to talk about imagery, and I want to talk about the way that we have told this story, communicated this story in the past. It has led to a lot of catastrophizing, visually in campaigns, things to provoke us and to ask us questions about how we live and what we do, which I think is completely fair enough and often is what is needed. So there's one here, and we're seeing basically a visual depiction of a fake rhinoceros being hunted. They've all gone. The future is man-made. This is WWF. And the idea is, what would it be like if you lose all these charismatic species? And the answer is kind of pretty horrible. It's not a very kind of pleasant world. The next one, we're seeing the lungs of the earth depicted as diseased, and the Amazon diseased, and this is what we breathe, and we're destroying. Why would we destroy what sustains us? Well, another very prescient question, but never mind, moving on. But the point is that if we have a quick whiz through the history of environmentalism, and I'm talking about popular environmentalism, what we started to see was these apocalyptic scenarios kind of packaged in order to provoke us to live differently or do different things. So if you think, has anyone read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson? Very good. Wow, what an eco-literate audience. I have to confess, I didn't actually read it until the reprint in 2012. But Rachel Carson was basically making the case, Silent Spring, she couldn't hear the birds anymore because of the pesticide use, and drawing those parallels between what corporations, industrialized agriculture was doing and how that would affect the natural world. So there was a lot of guilt tied up in this. Around the same time, we also had the first publications of the Whole Earth catalogue, which I don't know if you have seen, but it's worth getting hold of a copy of that, just because they are quite hilarious in some respects. But it was the first kind of idea that there was some kit to go with an alternative lifestyle. You could make your own geodesic domes, you could brew your own beer, you could actually opt out of the destruction and live a different life away from it. So these were the kind of popular sort of movements that developed in the 60s and 70s. Now, what I wanted to talk to you about today was the place of brands. And there was a very interesting sort of micro discussion there about which brands may lead this digital rollout or be the face of it. And I think that's really, really important. We'll come back to that in a minute, because brands have a certain currency and they can reach places that other things can't reach. It's quite a kind of quick, a kind of shorthand for getting to some places. And I'm actually quite in favour of that. So probably that's a bit different to a lot of green writers who kind of hate brands and any sort of consumerism. I always maintain that I'm quite happy to be a consumer, because this is a very lucky side of the fence to be on. But within that, if you live in a world where you have too much of everything, or it seems like you have too much of everything, then you have a certain responsibility to navigate that really, really wisely. And that's essentially what I do. So what that boils down to is that I write about what we might call ethical consumerism. And that's not just of actual physical stuff, but of services, energy, everything. I want to find different, better ways of being a consumer, basically. Excuse me. So where was I going with this? I think there were some brands who were very laudable in the past and started out quite early on this journey of saying, right, we're going to change some things about our product or our service. We're going to make it lower impact. We don't want a diseased Amazon because we made toilet rolls. We're going to change the way that we operate. The trouble was that very early on, this was communicated in a really, really apocalyptic way. So I'm thinking particularly about Tetra Pak, you know, the things that you get your juices in. So probably that's one of the first examples of a company trying to shift its supply chain to make its product better for the environment, and they started using a lot of post-consumer recycled content in those packages. That's probably not very sexy to communicate, and say 10, 15 years ago, nobody would have really known what you were on about anyway. So the way they did that was by these adverts. I don't know if you remember them, but they basically showed the rainforest not just being razed to the ground, but kind of on fire. I mean, it was absolutely like you watched it and you just kind of wanted to cry. It was kind of like total apocalypse. And the problem for that was that it is not empowering. So consumers were not empowered to change any of their behaviours or to possibly even buy the product. They just felt really, really sad and quite hopeless. The other flip side of that, we see some of the early car adverts for some of the early hybrids and electric vehicles. And what they have done is replace the kind of roaring internal combustion engine, you know, red-blooded male, the sexism, all the things that went into a car advert 10 years ago, and still now quite often. And they replaced it with a real kind of worthy kind of, this car, you know, has rose petals coming out of the exhaust practically. You can't hear it. It doesn't do anyone any harm. It's a kind car. What a kind car. And of course, the problem was that nobody wanted to buy it because they actually wanted some of the kind of thrilling stuff about purchasing a new car. So we had a sort of mix, a really horrible mix of adverts and communications that were either terrified the bejesus out of everybody or kind of bored them into a sort of submission, and it just wasn't really firing. I wanted to talk a little bit about why we now know that that doesn't really work. So, if we accept that we are consumers, as I do, what we started to see happen was that we started to put the human in the frame. So rather than just focusing essentially on the environment the whole time, we started to think about where our place was. What about people in the supply chain? Where are the narratives? Where are the humans in this story? And how can we unlock that? Because that seemed to be what we respond to more is, and I'll come on to this in a little while, but how we kind of connect with other people through what we buy and what we do and our impact. There are some findings from a very interesting report that came out last year, and it's from BBMG, advertising firm, and GlobeScan, a consultancy. And they've called it 5 Human Aspirations and the Future of Brands. And what they have found is, and I'm talking about a slightly different demographic to the one that we've been discussing predominantly this morning, and I'm going to talk about millennials in particular, We all groan. No, we don't. We love them. So what it's found, this survey, is that there has been a profound marketplace shift towards authenticity, well-being, sustainability, and social purpose. So there's some of the stats there about this new group that they've identified. They're young, they consume a lot, they're a big global audience, and they call them the aspirationals. Now, the interesting thing, there's a couple of things that I take away from this. First of all, aspirationals really trust brands. Not all of them, maybe not energy companies, but they trust a wide spread of brands. But they also have very, very high expectations. They expect those brands to perform ethically, and by ethically, I mean social and environmental justice. They will also punish those brands that are perceived not to be performing very, very quickly. So the guy who basically came up with this research, Raphael Bomperard, who's the founder of BBMG, he described it like this. So for the first 20 years when sustainability came to the marketplace, it was an obligation, like a medicine. It was good for us and good for society, and nobody wanted to buy it. So what they're talking about now is how we activate marketing, green consumerism to do its thing, how we can really switch people onto it. We know it's there, and we know that if we have the numbers, whether it's energy, whether it's food, and we need to kind of do all of these things, we can actually create a really big systemic change, system shift, and that's incredibly powerful. And what we need to do, and what this audience demands, is that we inspire and delight them. So it's no use shocking them into submission, it's no use boring them, it's no use trying to educate them, which is actually incredibly patronizing for a lot of people. We need to inspire and delight people. Easier said than done, but not impossible. I wanted to talk about greenwashing because what has happened in the past is that we've seen some of these ideas and initiatives turn into just a way of making something that's incredibly unsustainable appear a bit more sustainable. And I see it all the time in the fashion industry, which is an industry that I work a lot in, I'm sorry to say. So the origins of greenwashing actually come from an angry journalist. Who would have thought it? There's so many of us around, who was staying in a hotel, and he got really pissed off by those little signs that say, don't wash your towel, you know, you're going to save the planet by not washing your towel. And he looked into this hotel chain and actually crunched the numbers and found out that compared to the other way, the rest of their operations, saving your towel would really not do anything. So it's a disparity. It was an overclaim on their part. And I think this is kind of worth mentioning because we all kind of overclaim, and consumers are famously overclaimers. And a lot of brands overclaim as well. So it's kind of how do we steer, how do we navigate through those overclaims? My favourite greenwashing incident, by the way, has to be BAE Systems, the weapons manufacturers, who came up with a green munitions range, which I thought was kind of poetically beautiful. So they still have the weapons, but they'll biodegrade, so don't worry. Okay, so the future is obviously a very scary place for most of us. And part of the problem we know is that our political cycle and also our own brains kind of only work in kind of quite specific short-term ways. I really like this book from the 1970s with a very lurid pink cover, Future Shock, by Alvin Toffler. And I love this quote from it: "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn," which strikes me as kind of prescient, especially for now, but also points to the fact that there needs to be a degree of flexibility in how we think about things and how we approach some of these problems. It is, of course, easier to educate and start with a kind of eco-literate basis rather than retrofitting sustainability to people's lifestyles, because it's like retrofitting a house. It's much, much harder to do if it's not woven into the fabric. And I always speak about eco-literacy because it really kind of worries me that we still don't have sustainability embedded properly in the curriculum. And I think that's storing up a number of problems for the future. I'm going to talk a little bit now about some of the positives and the ways that we've tried to move on from a very hippie, hairy knit your own tofu hat kind of vision of what green meant and try and rebrand it and repackage it into something a bit shinier, sexier, and just a little bit more something that might inspire and delight, as I said before. So I'm going to talk about the fashion industry because I work in it a lot. And I think it has some parallels to other things. Fashion is a full spectrum industry. So it goes from the cotton bolls, where you grow them in the fields, uses huge amounts of pesticide, unbelievable amounts of energy. And people who talk about bringing clothing manufacture back to the UK, I'd be interested to know how they're going to monitor their energy use. But it is a huge, huge industry employing millions and millions of people. And it has huge issues. I'm going to whiz through all of this. So, I just wanted to talk about consumerism. This is a brain scan, or several brain scans, of people who are basically going shopping for clothes, but shopping for fast fashion. And fast fashion is the way that we predominantly buy clothes these days. I'm not a neuroscientist, so I'm not going to go into the specifics. Apologies if you are. But basically, it shows a lot of brain activity and stimulation when somebody sees the piece that they want, when they pick it up, when they hold it, and even maybe when they get to the till point. By the time they've paid for it, they're really not that interested. So it's all about hunting it down and acquisition. The knock-on effect of that is something called mob shopping. And I'm showing some pictures now of people behaving in just a really disgusting way. You'd be embarrassed if you were in one of these pictures, and you'd be furious if one of your kids was trying to push a policeman out the way so that they could get to a $2.99 t-shirt. I shop, therefore I am. It's a kind of mantra that we heard after the recession, that, you know, Black Friday in the States, buy as much as you can. It's how you show you're a patriot, is you buy as much stuff as you can. And we know that the fashion industry is a major outsourcer. So Bangladesh, where I've spent a lot of time, is where a huge part of where our clothing comes from, especially in the UK and in Europe in general. The Rana Plaza collapse. When I used to talk about this, by the way, a lot of people used to think I'd made it up. And they were always wheeling out people who were paid by the fashion industry to tell me there was no sweatshops left anymore. And it was all clean and lovely. Well, that kind of changed after the Rana Plaza collapse of 23rd of April 2013, when over 1,000 garment workers were killed in a single morning, and the whole place just fell like a house of cards. And these are not designated buildings. These are, you know, these are not proper factories. These are office blocks where they put generators on the roof because they need so much electricity. And then they had like machines inside, and the whole place just collapsed, basically. There's also the knock-on effect of the pollution. And if I had more time, I would talk to you about resources, but it's actually saying 0, 0, 0, 0. We know we need to do something about our resources. I went to a fascinating lecture about peak minerals and metals the other day, and we're getting close on everything, like phosphorus, the basis of our food supply because of the way that we use chemical fertilizers. These kind of industries that habitually pollute water resources, we cannot afford to behave like this anymore. We're kind of out of time on that. Waste is also endemic. We throw away 1/3 of all food that's created. I mean, it's crazy when you think of the energy and resources that go into producing that in the first place. This is the little plug. The True Cost was the documentary that I made about the fashion industry, and it's on Netflix, if you have Netflix. Top tip. So my point is that we need to decide what sort of consumers that we want to be. Again, I've picked fashion, and I've showed you this is an actual scheme where you can sign up and they'll just send you outfits in a box, in a cardboard box that you've had absolutely no hand in picking. You didn't like the colour of that tie, it's been sent to you. You don't know anything about where this is made. You have no relationship with the garment or the producer. I think that's really, really sad. Some people will just think, oh yeah, that's really convenient. But I just think it's really tragic. I don't want to own stuff that is delivered in such an impersonal way. Okay, the flip side of all of this is that humans are incredibly ingenious, and they come up with all sorts of ways and contraptions to make impact lower and to make us live better. I think someone said before we're between like good and better, but we're a long way from perfect. So there was a recent documentary that basically brought all the solutions together, which I kind of loved. I can't remember the name of it. But this is one where they're catching methane from this poor cow. I hope it's not unduly stressed by this weird blue bag that it's wearing. But is this the future? It's a very strange, what does the future look like? Sometimes it can look quite agrarian and old-fashioned. So this is a picture of a permaculture garden. So permaculture, getting the most out of a particular piece of land. Will it be enough to feed the world and a global population? Of course, the industrial agriculturists say absolutely not. It's complete nonsense, and then there's a sort of divide, two factions. Is this the house that we'll all live in? This is called Flood House. It's by an artist called Matthew Butcher. And if you were anywhere near the Thames estuary last month, you may have seen it floating along. So it's basically an idea of a house that adapts to climate change. There's a weather station in there, and it just goes with the flow, quite literally. That's not really very practical, though. We're all kind of flowing down the river, colliding into each other. I think there are lots of things that are going on which are starting to become quite mainstream. The problem with a house like the Flood House is it doesn't look like anyone else's house, so it becomes rarefied and exclusive. Last year I went to Coronation Street, who are doing it's my favourite soap opera, by the way. I've been watching it since I was 2. And they're doing unbelievable stuff behind the scenes to make it a green, low-impact, zero-carbon production. And I think that's really cool. They don't necessarily shout about it, although they do have the odd storyline about recycling. But it's something that's actually happening in one of the nation's biggest TV programmes. So I think all of this adds up, and I can tell you, because I get a post bag, a virtual post bag, obviously, every week from people who want clear instructions. They want to know what changes they can make, which ones will make the difference, and which ones are practical in their lives. So this is why I particularly hold out great hope for smart energy. And I'm really, really behind this rollout, because I know that the people that I talk to on a daily basis are really kind of hungry for it. And they're not all digital natives. You know, I'm certainly not a digital native, but it's something that, if it's presented in the right format, can really impact on my life and remove some of those barriers. So the quote from Anne Frank: "How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world." It's such a beautiful, beautiful, uplifting quote. I actually say it to myself quite a lot. But it's kind of, if we can get through some of these barriers and this stuff is accessible, and we all come together, as I think we are today, and come up with these really holistic solutions, I do think that this is the time. I do think that we have a chance to really, really push some of this through. So I'm just going to leave you with an image of a guy flying through the air over a very beautiful landscape, and hope that we don't have to return to those apocalyptic visuals again, and we can move on to something a bit brighter and fresher. Thank you.